The original Castlevania, released in 1986 for the Famicom Disk System, was a massive success. Directed by Hitoshi Akamatsu, he and his team also would go on to develop 2 and 3, although you wouldn't know this since they were contractually obliged to add fake names in the end credits. That's why the end credits have weird names like Christopher B. Get it? Christopher B, like Christopher Lee. Anyway, the Castlevania title itself came from the Konami of America vice president, who was a very religious man and basically wasn't cool with the original translation being Akamajo Dracula, which roughly could be translated as Devil Castle Dracula, or Dracula's Satanic Castle. He clearly isn't a fan of Satan, so it was changed to Castlevania. By sheer coincidence, the game itself was released to the US 90 years following the Bram Stoker novel Dracula, and was a success there as well, leading to sequels and a franchise that has lasted 30 years?
Something like that. That's close enough, man.
Yeah, 30 years.
Have you not ever seen YouTube channels before? There's always the guy in the background shouting at the other dude.
Oh yeah, true. The soundtrack itself is also iconic, with Vampire Killer quite possibly being one of the most popular video game songs ever made. Surprisingly, was the debut for composer Kinuyo Yamashita. In terms of the gameplay, for anyone who somehow doesn't know how Castlevania 1 plays, it's what you'd expect of an NES platformer of the time, being a deeply difficult set of obstacle courses in which success comes from trial and error and memorizing patterns to the point that you'll be able to beat the game in less than an hour. Simon Belmont moves in a very strict manner. Whenever you make an action with Simon Belmont, you have to commit to the action. When he whips, you are standing still in motion, and you have to wait until he's done whipping before you're allowed to move. When you jump, you cannot change your trajectory. You are committed to the jump.
Even on stairs?
Even on stairs. When you're on a pair of stairs, that's it. You're on a pair of stairs. You are not allowed to leave. Simon Belmont is a Chad who dedicates any action until it's finished. He's not someone that will just half-ass.
Do you think Simon shit himself before he started the fight with Dracula?
The way he walks for the rest of the game, I'm pretty certain he shat himself the entire time.
Do you think that's why
and was just walking with shit in his pants.
Do you think that's why he can't jump on the stairs?
Yeah, I think that might be why he can't jump on the
stairs. He's lifting his leg and he's afraid.
This is one hell of a tangent that isn't going anywhere. But anyway, once you get used to Simon's rigid control scheme, you're able to then work the game to your benefit, as every single obstacle in the game does revolve around how Simon controls and what sub-weapon you will have equipped at that moment in time. Yes, even that one damn hallway can be easily destroyed if you know exactly the right motions you need. Although I guess that could be said of any game.
From the NES era?
From the NES. Perhaps the same could be said of all NES games.
There you go.
For fuck's sake.
You're keeping that in.
Outside of that, there are references to movies and horror monsters everywhere. Every boss might as well be a tribute to the Universal horror era, with a mummy, Frankenstein's monster, and Dracula himself as the big main events. There's even a nice cute little film reel every time you start the game up. The bosses themselves are possibly the toughest part of the game, as you would expect from most NES games at the time. If you have the right sub-weapon, you can beat these bosses in mere seconds. However, that's easier said than done, as anytime you die, you will lose everything.
If I remember right, isn't Castlevania a game where you don't have a live system? So even though it's tough, you never actually lose the ability to keep playing.
Well, Castlevania doesn't necessarily have a life system. You can continue from where you left off at any given moment. You'll never see a game over screen that locks you completely out of playing.
But is it a thing where you start on that level every time, but you lose your checkpoint if you die too many times?
I believe so, yes. Castlevania 1, if you ever did want to play it, is fairly easy, as it's basically been ported to nearly everything. I'd go as far as to say that a Switch port is only a matter of time.
You don't think it's on that online service?
Oh, it's definitely going to be on that stupid fucking online service.
Would you like to spend, how much money is it a month?
Oh, I don't even want to think about that. While telling you every single system that you could play the original Castlevania game would be a complete headache, I can tell you some notable versions of the game that might pique your interest, such as the MSX2 game Vampire Killer, which released exactly a month after the original Castlevania, meaning that these two games must have been made in parallel to each other. As it's on the MSX, it does not have any screen scrolling like the NES variant. Instead, the game plays more like a maze where you would explore different rooms, solve puzzles, and have to find keys to eventually progress to the boss. Also, in what feels incredibly strange now, you're not restricted to just your whip. You can change to having a sword, an axe, or even a battle star. You only get 2 sub-weapons in the game, Holy Water and an Hourglass. It also includes a merchant, a series first. As you can imagine from that, you can use the merchant to buy items such as potions, maps. There are even a couple of things that can enhance Simon himself. This game likely influenced Castlevania 2's direction in some way. The other interesting version of Castlevania 1 would be the Sharp X68000.
Say that 3 times fast.
Yeah. Although you may not be aware of this version of the game, you may know it as Castlevania Chronicles on the PlayStation 1, which, along with the port of the Sharp X68000 version, also came with an arranged mode where Simon Belmont's appearance reflected Ayami Kojima's design and added remixed music by Sota Fujimori. Although I'm not particularly as charmed to this game's visuals and sound design as the NES original. While the original Castlevania would allow an extra playthrough that was far harder, Castlevania Chronicles is the king of not fucking around, with up to 6 additional playthroughs with increasing difficulty. I don't even want to imagine how much of a headache that must be to do. Why would you do that to yourself? Go outside. Don't do that to yourself.
Go outside to a real castle. Fight real demons.
The PlayStation version also comes with a time attack mode, as well as standard things like a gallery mode, for example. It's alright, however the NES original is king.
What would you say made Castlevania as a franchise, or this game, like, stand out so much that it became the franchise it did? Is there something you could say, was there one element or something about the game where you think's like, yeah, this is the spark that made this game stand out in the NES era?
I think what made Castlevania 1 stand out the most was both its general presentation and, well, the general theme of the game being more of a horror-orientated game. I can't think of many other alternatives at the time that really matched that. It was all like Mario and basically knockoffs of Mario. I would say that Castlevania at this time was likely the most quote-unquote mature game for the Nintendo Entertainment System as a platformer. And then with the unique way that characters move and the unique patterns that you'd have to deal with, I just think it was a winning formula that just captured its audience.
Do you think it might have something to do with the era of Americana? You had a lot of these 50s and 30s old horror films on TV, and You had films like, what was it, Monster Squad? All these other sort of like ideas. If it's Fright Night, Castlevania is almost quite relevant to the American culture.
Yeah, I'd agree. Yeah, I could say that Castlevania, by some magical coincidence, just managed to come out at a time when horror was becoming a very cool and popular genre in the 80s. You had things like Monster Vision, you had all these old you had all these creepy TV hosts that would play old horror movies or would play just any old junk at the time that was just scary. You had the popularity of the slasher genre at that time. Freddy Krueger or Jason had become marketable by the late 80s, and most children were at least aware of these kinds of characters, and I think by extension were then aware of horror as a genre. So when you go into the game store and you see Mario sitting next to a box of fucking Dracula glaring at some Van Helsing looking Chad with a whip, you're gonna want to play that game, because that's the game that looks...
Yeah, that plagiarized art, am I right?
Yeah, but that's the game that looks hardcore. That's the game where any 12-year-old's gonna be like, I'm a fucking man, I'm gonna play some goddamn Castlevania.
So, do you agree that this game is the Monster Mash on steroids?
Yeah, I could say that. I could say Castlevania is the Monster Mash on steroids.
That's all, folks.
Play it.